It's commonly believed that the Aegis system and its arsenal of guided missiles, the USS Spruance, could destroy any target from hundreds of miles away. But in the Gulf of Oman, the Spruance faced a cruel paradox. It didn't lack firepower, but sheer firepower alone wouldn't allow it to capture a nearly 900-foot-long container ship. A labyrinth of steel the size of 3 football fields wasn't a target to shoot down. It was a vast tactical space to be taken over. In modern naval warfare, stopping a ship is only the first step. Capturing it is the decisive step. And that's why the Spruance needed another piece to decipher this labyrinth. The world has seen this scenario broken in a bitter way before. In 2015, Iran intercepted the Maersk Tigris in the Strait of Hormuz, using machine guns to hold a supertanker hostage strategically right before the eyes of the international community. At that time, the US could only watch and escort from afar. But by 2026, the question is no longer how to board a ship, but how to take it back from the enemy. The Maersk Tigris scar teaches us an uncomfortable truth. A civilian cargo ship can become a political leverage point faster than any warship. And to win, you don't need more ammunition. You need a completely new way of organizing perception. Today, we'll decode the counter-strategy that transformed a simple ship interception into an absolute control operation. Why wasn't the most heavily armed destroyer enough? Why was the Tuska's 900 foot size a deadly geometric challenge for the task force? And why was the USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship, the master key to locking down this container fortresses? Navy Codex, Decoding Systems Intelligence. Start now. To understand why the USS Tripoli needs to appear in 2026, we have to turn back the clock to April 2015. At that time, the container ship Maersk Tigris was sailing through international waters when it was approached by Iranian patrol boats. With just a few warning shots, Iran forced the massive ship flying the Marshall Islands flag to divert deep into their territorial waters. Why was the Maersk Tigris so vulnerable? Because at that time, the superpower's response was limited to monitoring and escorting. The US sent destroyers to the area, but all they could do was observe from afar and ensure subsequent ships had bodyguards. The Maersk Tigris became a strategic leverage point for Tehran to test Washington's patience and international law. It was a lesson in fragility. When you only have escort, you don't have control. The old logic failed because it used firepower to intimidate, rather than physical presence to seize. In the labyrinth of containers, if you can't control the space inside, you never truly control the ship. On the 19th of April, 2026, in the Gulf of Oman, the Tuska problem forced CENTCOM to rewrite the script. This 900-foot container ship didn't stop after 6 hours of warning signals. It was hurtling toward Bandar Abbas at 17 knots, carrying variables that the US couldn't afford to overlook. This is when the USS Spruance made a breakthrough in Doctrine, disabling fire. Instead of shooting to sink like in the Cold War, the Mark 45 cannon fired 3 precise shots at the engine room. The goal wasn't destruction, but kinetic stop. However, with Tuska stationary, a new physics problem emerges. Spruance has the firepower to stop the ship, but it doesn't have the wings to seize it. That's why the system needs another power core, the USS Tripoli. The Maersk Tigris of 2015 taught America the helplessness of simply watching. The Tuska of 2026 proves that. To turn an order into situational ownership, the destroyer's firepower is merely the facilitator. The presence of Marines from Tripoli is the game changer. As the USS Spruance approached the Tuska, the officers on the bridge didn't see a transport vessel. They were seeing a massive, hostile, tactical space. Consider the physical dimensions of a Panamax-class container ship, 900 feet, nearly 275 meters long, equivalent to 3 football fields lined up end to end. When fully loaded, the Tuska carried over 5,000 standard containers. Each of those steel blocks was a blind spot, a physical barrier, and a potential hiding place. A massive civilian ship at sea can be more difficult to control than an armed speedboat, because the issue here isn't firepower, but the geometry of chaos. Why is this scale a nightmare for special forces teams? Let's dissect the Tuska's structure from a VBSS, visit, board, search, and seizure operational perspective. With its hull tens of meters above the water, approaching from below by speedboat is suicidal if the enemy is armed. A single grenade thrown from above or a machine gun fire would wipe out the entire formation. Thousands of containers stacked on top of each other form narrow, deep, and dark corridors. The destroyer's surface radar is completely powerless in scanning moving targets within this labyrinth. The distance from the control tower to the machinery area at the rear is hundreds of meters of solid steel. Just a small group of Iranian crews entrenched in enclosed compartments could turn the ship into a mobile fortress that would be impregnable by conventional coercive measures. Don't confuse an unarmed target with a non-threatening target. The sheer size of the Tuska creates a reaction delay. A boarding crew from a destroyer would take hours just to conduct a preliminary inspection of the deck surface. During that time, any number of variables could occur, from the destruction of documents, the destruction of contraband, to the planting of interlocking explosive devices, IEDs, between the container blocks. The Tuska's 900 foot scale is not just a physical number, it's a matter of space and time. To tackle such a large surface area maze, the Spruance's gunfire could only stop the ship, but not clear it. We need a force that can overwhelm the entire height of the ship in a split second. That's when the antidote called vertical seizure must be activated. According to the 19th of April, 2026 combat report, MV Tuska ignored all radio messages for 6 consecutive hours. This is when the USS Spruance executed controlled escalation. Using its Mark 45 naval gun, the Spruance did not aim for a hull sinking, but instead employed engine room disabling fire. 3 127mm rounds were fired precisely at the propulsion system. The physical objective was to destroy the propulsion and generator systems, but the strategic objective was to disable maneuvering while keeping the target intact enough to take over. However, after Tuska stopped, a power vacuum appeared. The Spruance had stopped the ship, but it could not enter it. This is the breaking point of old naval warfare logic. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is designed to neutralize threats from hundreds of miles away, not to manage a multi-story container maze. If the Spruance sent small, high-speed boats, ribs, to board the Tuska, they would immediately fall into the geometric trap. To control a 900-foot-long entity, you can't go from below. You have to take control of the space from above. This is why the USS Tripoli, LHA-7, an America-class amphibious assault ship, became the center of the operational nervous system. While the Spruance acted as the executor of surface firepower, the Tripoli was the multi-dimensional approach platform. As the Tuska remained stationary and drifted freely in the Sea of Oman, the counter-algorithm entered its decisive phase, vertical insertion. From the Tripoli deck, MH-60S Seahawk helicopters and F-35B fighters launched. In this way, the US solved the Tuska's geometric problem by turning its entire deck into a landing zone. They didn't capture the ship horizontally, they occupied it vertically. Marines swarmed simultaneously at multiple points: the command bridge, the engine room roof, and key container areas. Tripoli didn't appear because the Spruance was weak. Tripoli appeared because the target needed to be physically controlled, not simply shot down. The US didn't win with a single devastating shot. They won by linking different platforms into a seamless chain of coercion. The Spruance created a mechanical stopping point, while Tripoli provided the door to enter the labyrinth. We are seeing the resonance of a system where the destroyer's firepower is merely the gateway to the Marines' situational control. In naval warfare, geography is more than just coordinates on a map. It's a filter that defines the limits of power. The 2015 Maersk Tigris incident took place right in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrowest point of the global energy lifeline. By the 2026 Tuska seizure, the operational position had shifted to the international waters of the Gulf of Oman. However, don't let this shift in coordinates mislead you. Both are part of a single strategic logic: geopolitical geometry. This is the space through which all trade flows must pass, a corridor that Iran has the ability to coerce and which the US has an incentive to control absolutely. Here, the boundary between international waters and national territorial waters becomes blurred under the pressure of artillery fire. The difference between 2015 and 2026 is not about whether the strait narrows or widens, but about how the US defines its response. 2015. The US response was a passive reflex. After the Maersk Tigris was captured, the US could only increase surveillance and escort. The goal was to prevent repeated coercion, but the initiative remained entirely in Tehran's hands. 2026. The US implements a complete coercion chain, from radio warnings to neutralizing firepower, Air Force deployment, and finally, seizure. We are witnessing a shift from preventing thieves to raiding their hideouts. The US is no longer waiting for Iran to act. They are proactively establishing new rules of the game right in the waters that Iran considers its home turf. The Hormuz teaches the US that trade, law, reason, and war are inseparable. Back then, terrain was where we were ambushed by surprise. Now, thanks to sensor networks and the presence of platforms like Tripoli, terrain has been transformed into data. But for that data to become control, the system must survive long enough, operate cleanly enough, and maintain iron discipline against the saturated pressures of the Gulf. Hormuz didn't eliminate the US Navy's advantage. It just made it more expensive to maintain. In this geopolitical geometry, the winner is the one who can execute the most complex siege with the greatest composure. Tripoli didn't just bring troops, it brought the highest level of crisis management capability. Look at how the siege of Tuska reached its climax. This wasn't a sequential series of actions, but a synchronized pulse. While the USS Spruance kept its guns pointed directly at enemy infrastructure to lock down any attempts at maneuver, from the deck of the USS Tripoli, an aeronautical nervous system was launched. Helicopters weren't just transporting troops. They carried electro-optical and infrared radar sensors to scan every movement on the 900 foot deck. The US won not because they fired faster, but because they connected the different platforms into a seamless, coercive chain. But there's another layer of negativity here, the mathematics of attrition. Even a powerful destroyer like the Spruance has limitations on the number of VLS launchers. If the US wasted expensive SM-6 missiles on an unarmed aircraft carrier, they were weakening themselves against greater threats on the horizon. The synergistic power of the Tripoli is the solution to this economic problem. By using helicopters and Marines instead of long-range guided weapons, the US kept the magazine depth of its strike group at the highest possible readiness. The Iranian adversary might have calculated that the US would be hesitant to escalate due to cost, but the arrival of the amphibious force shattered that logic. The US didn't need to deplete its ammunition to capture a ship. They only needed a sufficiently clean nervous system to coordinate the right weapon layer for the right target layer. The adversary was no longer fighting a ship. They were fighting a brain, capable of optimally managing resources. The siege of the Tuska was the ultimate proof of systemic synergy. The US won not with a single destructive shot, but by connecting the entities. The destroyer forcing a halt, the amphibious assault ship launching its forces, the helicopters creating access points, and the Marines establishing a presence. When the MH-60S Seahawk helicopters from the USS Tripoli made their final vertical deployment onto the Tuska's deck, the network of firepower and sensors had completed its role. But at this point, a new chapter of the siege unfolded, where algorithms gave way to intuition and legal responsibility. In the age of AI and data fusion, it's easy to mistakenly think that officers are merely observers. The reality is quite the opposite. At the USS Spruance and Tripoli CIC command centers, the OODA, observe, indicate, decide, act loop didn't disappear. It was compressed under the suffocating pressure of time. Consider the operation commander's decision on April 19th. The machines reported the Tuska ignored the warning. Radar and thermal sensors showed the presence of crew members in the engine room. This is the bottleneck. The machines could suggest destruction, but humans had to decide, don't sink. The decision to shift from destructive firepower to neutralizing firepower is an extremely sensitive, ethical, and legal choice in a sea teeming with civilian vessels. The victory here isn't about AI replacing humans, but about the system providing such a clear picture that commanding officers make fewer mistakes when everything is happening at Mach 3. Humans remain the final link confirming the enemy's physical presence before the Marines leave their safety harnesses. If Iran only needs to use an old container ship to force the US to deploy an entire task force, they are employing an economic attrition tactic. American power in this case doesn't lie in explosives, but in demonstrating that they are willing to pay a higher price to maintain order. The greatest price for a superpower isn't the initial firing, but maintaining control after the first blast is passed. The Tuska capture wasn't an isolated incident. It was a glimpse into the future of naval warfare. The future isn't about more ammunition, but about more control. The US Navy is making a dramatic shift toward distributed maritime operations, DMO doctrine. The trend over the next few years will be not just massive ships, but a deeper integration of unmanned platforms and rapid response teams. The USS Tripoli in this story isn't just a specific ship. It's the embodiment of a new doctrine, a shift from long-range firepower to physical possession. The US maintains its lead not because it's currently perfect, but because it's able to learn from historical scars faster than any rival. After all, the lesson of the April 19th operation wasn't that the US captured an Iranian ship. The real lesson lies in the hierarchy of coercion. In modern naval warfare, preventing a ship from moving and turning that ship into a completely controlled target are two different levels. The USS Spruance represented coercion through firepower strict and precise. But the USS Tripoli represented the ability to transform coercion into situational ownership, overwhelming and comprehensive. The US had to resort to the Tripoli because a 900-foot cargo ship wasn't a target to be shot down and done with. It is a labyrinth of steel that must be captured, swept, and held by the coordinated efforts of an entire wartime nervous system. Navy Codex poses a thought-provoking question. In a modern naval enforcement operation, which is the harder part, stopping the target with million-dollar firepower, or stepping aboard and controlling it without letting the situation spiral out of control? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.